time.
Good evening. It's Thursday, April 6th, and this is the start of the meeting of the Planning Commission for Goochland County. Ms. Parker, do we have a quorum this evening?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Most gracious God, thank you for enabling us to gather here today. Thank you for this body of people that you have ordained to rule this great county. Now, as we go about doing the business set forth today, help us to keep you first in everything that we say and do. Bless all who are in authority with proper knowledge, wisdom, understanding, so that we may prosper under their leadership. Most of all, bind us together in a spirit of love which surpasses all things. It is in your omnipotent way. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, item number one, we have the annual election of our officers, and the nominating committee had met, and they are nominating for chairperson, Mr. Tom Rocker, Charlie, and for vice chair, Mr. Matt Brewer, for the next term.
And we do need a motion and a vote.
Okay? Is there a motion to approve?
I move we approve.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So I will now hereby present Mr. Rocker, Charlie, and our chairperson.
Everyone has received a copy of the minutes from Ms. Parker. Is there any additions or corrections?
No, Mr. Chair, and I move to approve the minutes from last meeting.
A second. Moved and seconded. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We're now open for a citizen comment period on anything that's not on the agenda tonight. You have 3 minutes to come up and speak about anything that you wish.
Good evening, Jonathan Lyle, 1521 Mannequin Road. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman. I want to take a moment to just say publicly how much I appreciate the effort that staff has put into some of the items you'll be looking at tonight. It has been an extended process in some viewings, but actually I think it's been very thorough, and it's gone through a number of iterations. Staff has reached out and really...
Mr. Lyle, is this regarding tonight's agenda?
No, this is regarding the staff and the good job they're doing. I just want to say I so appreciate what the staff has done to engage the community, to get input, and to really make this something that may not be perfect, to make the process that you folks consider may not be perfect, but it's not from a lack of effort on their part. So I will refrain from referring to specifics, but I will say that there really has been a lot of engagement, a lot of outreach, and we at the Farm Bureau appreciated seeing them. We at Monacan District appreciated seeing them. They're engaged, and I think that should be recognized without speaking to anything specifically, because I'm sure they're doing it on a number of issues there. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Anybody else wish to speak? Close the public comment period. We'll go into the regular agenda. Is there any request for additions, deferrals, nothing?
No, sir.
Okay.
Our first public hearing item is countywide ZOA 2022-2, amendment to zoning ordinance section 15, 102, 112, 132, 142, 152, 162, 72, 82, 92, 204, 214, 232, 242, 252, 262, and 272, uses and structures permitted by right or by conditional use permit, to allow energy storage facilities by conditional use permit in the Agricultural General A1, Agricultural Limited A2, Industrial Limited M1, and Industrial General M2 districts, to allow principal solar energy facilities by conditional use permit in the Agricultural General A1 District to allow supplementary solar energy facilities by conditional use permit in the Industrial Limited M1 and Industrial General M2 districts, and to allow accessory solar energy facilities as a permitted use in all zoning districts except the Agricultural Intensive A3 District, to amend Section 15500 definitions to add solar-related terms, and to amend Section 15289 renewable energy to add use standards.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. I like to make it sound like it's really, really, really big when you have an ad that good. Let's see. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This item before you tonight is something that we've previously visited about and had been deferred to this time. Part of that deferral is to allow us to reach out to the public. What we'll talk about tonight in the public hearing is really actions of staff since the previous hearing, give you an update as to what we did. We're going to be talking about the county code, items that were just referenced by Ms. Parker. Also talk about the board policy proposal that accompanies it. At the end, I'll start going over specific topics related to the solar policy and the policy changes that have come about. They're really from commentary and meetings with the public. So since we last saw you, we had meetings with with different interested parties. Could have been individuals, those different groups, different entities that could be producing the solar, or citizen groups, or other state promoted groups that we were responsible to. We have reviewed comments and responses. In fact, we had already done a lot of review prior to seeing you last time. We had modified it a bunch to match comments we'd already heard. We did have a countywide meeting back in February, which was pretty well attended. We got great feedback at that meeting, and actually an opportunity for staff to learn as well, hearing from people. And we have done some minor changes to the policy since then. So going into really what the proposal is. For the county code changes, as Ms. Parker referenced, we're talking about expanding the accessory solar, doing what's called new solar energy supplementary, solar energy principle, which is formerly the solar farm, and then new energy storage facility. So when we're talking about the solar energy facility accessory, we already had it in the ordinance as panels or structure. This really, we redefined the use to make sure everybody understands you're producing energy for your on-site consumption. Could be your rooftop solar, could be some other type of presentation for businesses. What the ordinance was missing was the ability for farmers in the agricultural districts to actually use that by right provision to be able to have additional production beyond what their capacity was. All of this is laid down in state code. All we did was make sure our code accounted for it. Again, the rooftop is the most common example. Solar energy facility supplementary is one we're looking at for conditional use stability within M1 and M2 districts. And it has to be located on a site that already has a permitted principal use. So in other words, you can't just go out there and put panels. You already have a business that operates there. We often see in certain businesses out there, especially with the green focus of economy and stuff, that there's the opportunity that they would actually like to generate additional electricity on their existing facilities. What this provides for is that a total of 10% of your land of that site, occupied site, can be utilized for solar. What we wouldn't count against you in that 10% calculation is the rooftop or other type of equipment that you have in the site, such as parking structures or the like. Some examples we have up here on the board, particularly the one on the right is really the example. They're using about every rooftop and structure and parking canopy or whatever they have to utilize additional solar. The other one is proposed, Tredegar, I think Dominion Energy on their site is using it. That's really on site, but it's utilizing their parking garage. Next is, there's a person in the ordinance that always likes to correct me when solar farm comes up, and he's correct. Like to say we grow the farm here in Goochland, but we don't. It rises here in Goochland. We also recognize the solar energy facility principle is the new title for that. Again, that is where you're generating primarily on the property. The use is wholesale energy. It goes into the grid. It's not designed for on-site uses. It's designed to go elsewhere. The policy that we have, and we'll talk about later, is primarily focused on handling the CUP request for these. The ordinance only allows this use in the A1 district as a conditional use. We're pretty familiar with the terms of the solar by now. As an example here, these are panels that actually follow the sun as the day goes forward. There's tons of different variations today, and they're sort of changing probably as we speak. So the policy, which is the main focus of the topic tonight, is really the board policy that's intended to serve in our evaluation and an applicant's preparation of a conditional use application for either the solar energy generation facility or energy storage facility. It's given general criteria, application requirements. It also provides some standard recommended conditions. As with any conditional use permit that we bring before you, we have to consider it in its own merit. We have to consider each case. Each case is unique. Each property is unique. So, our policy may not specifically address every operational or locational concern for that application. They could be modified during the discussion with the case, and finally, as we bring it forward to the board, as we recognize using our standard evaluation principles, that we need to adjust the conditions for this case, or it has merit to operate in a different way. That's the beauty of a policy versus an ordinance, and that was sort of the intent as we came forward. What we've done since the Planning Commission changes-wise, we did, I changed a bunch of things from thou shalt to should, which really gets rid of the mandate kind of provisions that I know the county attorney doesn't like us to use for these circumstances. We're also requiring that we get certain farm and land data come about from existing available sources at the time of zoning application, so we really have a good idea of the land being utilized. It's going to have to be updated when we finally get to plan of development, when we really know what the actual layout of a site is. The other is that we'd like to require electronically the size and scale of the plat so we know exactly what the facility boundary is. That's advantage in calculation for the percentages that come about in the policy, but it's also very important when you talk about the land use and the retax that comes about when you put something into operation and you've been sitting in land use for years. We've done some updates to material sizes and buffers to more incentivize native plants. We are allowing some flexibility or potential flexibility to disturb an additional acreages beyond the 100 acres. That'll be a site-specific evaluation. And require update to our traffic management and maintenance plan for roads if it's needed for the decommissioning plan updates. So as the policy, I won't go into every detail. I'll stay pretty general, try to move us along tonight. It is limited in only A1. That's also the recommendation of the policy. That's what the ordinance says. We also are looking for a minimum 2-mile separation between the facilities at this point. And then we don't want it to cluster them. We'd like to preserve the rural view sheds, but also we encourage the continued rural and agricultural uses we anticipated in our plan for the west. We're limiting the facility area to contiguous acres between 30 and 1,000 acres. When we came forward with this, we were really trying to look at opportunities to allow for smaller solar facilities and preserve land that's in there in the west. Energy generation, just as you think about it in your head, a solar facility can go from anywhere to 5 to 10 megawatts per acre. So when you think about the calculations of 150, actually that's the opposite. But anyway, it takes, if you're talking about a larger facility site, it takes a lot to get a lot. Most ordinances focus on energy output. We instead turn the policy to focus on the land involved and the impact. Standard site evaluation, as you'd expect, and we want to protect environmental sensitive areas. What's different for this and a lot of other policies is we're one of the first to come forward with limiting the amount of prime agricultural or state lands of statewide significance used within a particular project. As I'll show you a map in a few minutes that'll kind of sells why we're doing that, and there it is. There's the map. In this map shows you our A1 area of the county, which is really everything sort of west of where we're standing today. Parcels 30 acres or greater are what's in orange, and those are vacant parcels. The green that's in that map area is the underlying prime farmland. So if you see there are opportunities, however, if you see where the green and the orange overlap, recognizing only 20%, let's say if one of those large parcels came in, only 20% of that land could contain the green. The red line is the major transmission line that goes across the western tier of the county. The other part of the policy talks about standard conditions that would come forward with the CEP. Just like when we have an accessory dwelling, we have standard conditions. This would serve that function for those two uses. Subject to plan development, complies with the siting agreement with the county. We've done some update for the buffers to make them more enhanced than what we currently have in our zoning ordinance to make them match more of a natural forest or natural environment. And now we've put in an inference that we want to preserve, we want to have more native species. Standard other things, we screen the equipment, transmission lines, we want to be below ground. Limit the construction, the disturbance, and then limit construction activity to make sure they're better neighbors even during the construction and decommissioning process. We'd also like to have conditions regarding how they operate, the facility's conditions, its design. We want to be aware of ownership changes or when they start up and things like that because it's important to know how the facility is operating. Decommissioning plan is one of the most key integral parts of this that staff reviews it that way and the state has viewed it that way as well. We want to have that decommissioning plan, the shutdown plan with the POD review. We want to have different protections that we've established during the development to remain in place. We don't want the panels to be recycled or disposed of in Goochland County. That's always been a big topic with a lot of people. Technology's changing. The toxicity of the panels may change over time or concerns of that, but it's in our policy. The decommissioning, we want to update every 3 years for that. Update the plan to see what's changed and the surety. As we all know, prices are changing pretty quickly these days, and if I'd have had a plan 3 years ago, we'd all be in trouble for that. The next is to do energy storage facilities, and what those are the batteries. So what we're defining, this is basically, they take and absorb the the energy from the lines. Doesn't necessarily have to be with just a solar facility, which is the reason it's called out separately. These could be in a variety of different locations where you have other substations, different pieces where basically take and store the energy coming off the line. It's absorbed, it sits inside those batteries to serve later in peak times, or perhaps when a clean energy system like the sun is not out. So you can actually keep the grid moving. This would also have a siting policy agreement, that siting agreement they have to make with the county, and also some conditions that we thought are appropriate to make sure we're protecting adjacent properties. These, however, would be allowed in different places. A1, because it's likely with solar. A2, because it's a lot of our lines, the north-south line that's in the eastern part of the county goes in a lot of A2 property. And M1 and M2, because that's most likely where you're going to have the more of extensive or heavy power equipment. This is what these look like. I've been told they look better today than this one, but they're about the same size as what you see as a shipping container. All right, then there's a siting agreement. We talked about this last time for any solar, principal solar or energy storage project. By state code, the applicant must meet with the county, inform us, discuss, and negotiate a siting agreement. This is in addition to any zoning requirement. We could talk about all sorts of things with it, but primarily it's about the mitigation of the impacts, financial compensation to address capital needs. We always look at it, there needs to be a nexus between the application and what the sort of agreement discussion is about. But if we fail to meet an agreement, that cannot be the only reason we deny the CU. But it can be among your reasonings for that. So next, I'm going to really go through some of the larger topics that came up in discussion with the people, with citizens and at different meetings to kind of understand the issues that are out there. Some of these we've addressed, some we know we'll explore a little bit more in the future. But we want to make sure we kind of put those in your head and just make sure we understand we're sharing people's thoughts here. First off, why do we use agricultural lands for solar and not industrial? It's so that the state more incentivizes the use of agricultural land. It comes about for a variety of different reasons. The land costs, it's also, in a lot of ways, land use, it's a passive use. If we do proper mitigation and preservation, reduce its impact. Opportunity, the different scales to preserve family land. Limited impact on public services and county infrastructure. I don't have to generate school buses for solar panels. Solar energy can bring upgrades to our grids in our rural areas that are often in poor shape, and can bring high-speed internet. It allows the use to go on the land that's relatively passive and people can use their lands, so we don't get in a scenario where a lot of our suburban localities are where the land's just sitting there waiting for houses. It's nice to have people be able to preserve their land and not look for other development opportunities that could lead to sprawl. Industrial, you don't put them industrial very often, mainly because there's a lot of other infrastructure investment, a lot of other high power, a lot of money from federal, state, local dollars going to generate the jobs, the sales tax, the M&T tax, real estate revenues, and utilizing the planned infrastructure that we've already invested in, for instance, in the West Creek area or up in the Notch. For staff, we need to encourage ways that we preserve that rural character. We think and I'll agree, other people will say it, I like to eat as it can be seen, and I really agree that we need to do our best to preserve the farmland. Our policy helps that. Encourage the use of industrial brownfield and quarry landfill sites. Good idea. Our ordinance does provide for limited wholesale production of solar from those industrial sites. At this time, we don't have any of those large resources available that some other more industrial localities have. However, we do recognize the opportunity in this next generation or the next several years, next decades, that we have some land that will be ready for that. So staff wants to continue to evaluate the opportunities and the trends for that. So we've recommended no ordinance change or policy change at this time, but we'll still be evaluating that, and actually I'll be meeting with some interested parties in the near future. Why do we limit the sizes between 30 and 100 acres? That was a big concern. That was too small, too big. So what we've done, we were encouraging originally small to medium-sized facilities. We didn't want the 16,000 acre model in Goochland, but there's opportunities out there of smaller that are 1 to 3 megawatt sites, so you're talking 15, 20 acre sites. We also we want to evaluate, just like with everything else, we want to evaluate this policy over time. Did we hit it right? Is this what the market's looking for in Goochland? The board, of course, and the commission can recommend different sizes. And you'll see, I'm sure we'll see applications of a variety of sizes. The other concern was limit the total acreage of solar in the county. We haven't proposed a limit at the start. Some of the localities have over time added those in. My concern at this point was it's a lot of guesswork. We don't know what the interest is. We don't know what the impact is. We don't know what the market interest is. We don't know where our acceptance is. Once we get a couple of these applications going, we'll start to evaluate that, what the interest is, what the technology is coming about, what's Dominion Energy and the state looking for. We can start evaluating what's the good number for Goochland. Why require underground transmission lines? This is a big concern of the industry. For us, we recognize that they need that infrastructure. You're making a power grid, you're generating the energy, it needs to go somewhere. We want it to get to people, to homes, to businesses. But what we wanted to make sure is that we're preserving, again, that rural character. We thought that limiting the above-ground transmission lines would encourage them to be located closer to the lines that already exist, or the ability to connect to those. We also want to minimize the impact of having new lines or tree cuts that traverse the county and, or run along our roads. So it's something that over time will need to be evaluated. I've met with Dominion and some others about the concept, but it's something also we recognize that should be evaluated as part of an individual application. What is the impact beyond the site of those lines? That's all part of the discussion that we'll bring to you. Next is the bonding requirements for decommissioning would limit investment. That was a put forward that was concerned. Staff does not see that way. We've seen it as a common practice in the region, and it's also permitted by state code. We think it encourages site upkeep, assures the neighbors and the county that the site will be taken care of over time. Decommissioning of these facilities is new. There is not, to my knowledge, there hasn't been one decommissioned in this region because it's still an emerging technology. We'd rather ride it out and see. And then over time, if that policy needs to be adjusted, it can. Bonding at startup, not site approval, is another request. Every other use we have in the county, we require bonding at time of POD approval to include subdivisions. We'd like to continue that. Startup is a contractual agreement that Ray Cash is not invited to the table to talk about with them. We also don't want to be the one holding up a startup. We'd rather make sure everybody understands ahead of time this is our bonding agreement. And then as we get here, the final things is really stuff we heard from the community and those interested in the environment. Is to encourage the use of native species and protect habitats. We have added incentives, as I mentioned before, for the buffers. We already encourage native habitats, wildlife friendly fencing and the like in the plan. We want to encourage preservation of existing habitats and native ground cover. We want native trees to come in here because we want the same animals, the same species to generate, to let these blend back into the land, surround there. A key part of our policy is we do not want you to ride down the road and see solar panels. We want you to drive down the road and see the beauty that Goochland already has. And this is a way to encourage the preservation of those areas and making sure our native species are here taking care of the insects and other things that we have. And then finally is allow for agrivoltaic or shared agricultural and solar uses. Okay, the policy allows that use. We encourage it. The underlying use is agricultural. That's the underlying zoning. So if you can do your agricultural farming activity at the same time that you're generating power, great. And we applaud that opportunity. There was a person, I think if you were at the community meeting, saw his business is bringing sheep like that out there to feed underneath it, to graze under the panels. That is an emerging technology. There's webinars available all the time. We're learning more about this. The industry is learning more opportunities to make this work. That should also be consideration of any case we bring forward to you. Is that part of the opportunity that makes that site more special than others or meets the criteria we're looking for as something that's good for the community? So I ran quickly through something that's a big topic, a lot of stuff in there. Again, this is something that we've discussed before. We've also discussed with the public. This is a board policy that we recognize that over time, it can be modified. That's the reason it's part of a policy, not an ordinance. We have more flexibility during discussion when we're meeting with clients. You have more flexibility as a commission in your recommendations, judging them based upon this criteria we have. How do they fit? What conditions should apply here, or what would be more appropriate for that situation? As I mentioned before, a lot of these I've recognized over the coming years, maybe in the next couple months, who knows when, we'll probably be doing some modifications as we learn more, as we experience more, and as the industry also becomes more familiar with us. So staff, of course, is available for any questions.
Mr. Cash, are there currently any other facilities in Goochland County other than the one on Shannon Hill Road?
To my knowledge, that's the only one.
Okay. Have you had much in the way of inquiries as far as future facilities?
We have, well, I will say, right, the first week I was here, I heard we had one coming, and I got contacted, but I've not had a meeting since then about it, and that was a year and a half ago. We do know that there's been some interest stepped up, but to my knowledge, we haven't had a formal meeting with staff about an individual project, if I'm correct.
I'm assuming that when you put these up on the roof, that you have to get a building permit, and the structural integrity of the roof is taken into account, that they won't blow off or cause
Right,
leaks and
yeah,
stuff.
that's part of the evaluation. I actually had a meeting recently about, there's actually a national drive from the federal government about creating a sort of a uniform permitting system to help with that type of thing for people to generate. I take it back, we did have one large-scale roof, it's a type of project for solar, but it was for an industry here, but it wasn't, they weren't producing more than what to do. And that was something also we had to get a plan, we had to get building permits for to make it work.
Will these be permitted in a conservation district?
It would not be anything we wouldn't let them clear land for solar panels or the like within conservation areas. Yeah, they could be if it's an area that's not protected and you're in the right district. But there would be.
Because you don't have to pay tax, you get a tax break if you put your land in the.
Well, if you're bringing it out to go into a generation for wholesale, for profit, I would assume that something we have to explore may take you out of that, unless that's part of the agreement.
It would automatically kick you out of it.
That would be my assumption, but that's something I have to research to be sure.
Is this similar to Hanover, Chesterfield, Powhatan?
Actually, most of them have commonalities as we started to learn together a couple of years ago. As these come on, it's a lot of the ordinances are lessons learned from those who first experienced it, especially in Southern Virginia. We'll say, this has a lot of commonalities with Chesterfield. I know because I'd written that one, and it has some commonalities with the one that just got adopted in Louisa as well. You'll see the words are a lot different, but the concepts are about the same. Some have smaller buffers, some have bigger, some have different limitations in different way, but they're all usually addressed with mitigation and concern about erosion control.
Why would a solar energy, what'd you call it?
Solar energy facility principle.
Facility be decommissioned?
Well, right now is that they talk about the life of the panels, is my understanding, and some anywhere, originally started talking at 20 years, could be 30 years. Again, once a facility is put in place, and I think the way technology is changing and the like, and the infrastructure that's involved in that, there's no guarantee that they may be seeking decommissioning. However, that's something that, being a concern with people to leave all that infrastructure, and was especially before considered a rural area, would be of concern that you create these sort of junk graveyards with that, in a way, galvanized pipe and a bunch of solar panels. That's also a concern that you're making sure that these things are being replaced and the panels and stuff are being stored properly. So that would be something that maybe somebody from the industry could tell you for sure. But I always become a little bit more curious of the investment and what is the likelihood of decommissioning, or perhaps the sites, because it's so expensive to regenerate, replace all those panels, and maybe it's cheaper to bring things down and the like.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I feel like that's almost a lesson learned from back in the day with telecommunications towers. I mean, when those first went up, right, they were the big deal, the hot thing, and nobody thought about when those were
What's it
no
like when
longer
come to-
technologically feasible. And the first time those started coming to where somebody just abandoned them, we were all like, wait a minute, that should have been
We didn't
taken
think about
down.
this. It's not like something that's a good adaptive reuse as far as you can't house people on top of that telecommunication tower or underneath solar panels. So.
Thank you.
Is the bond in the beginning going to pay for decommissioning? Is that what the bond is for?
That's the intent, is to make sure that somebody's responsible for the decommissioning. Just like we bond for roads when a subdivision occurs and stuff, that's to make sure that eventually they get in state system or get built. Part of this to make sure that somebody is responsible for the cleanup at the end. We have language in there about how we could step in if somebody fails to or whatever, but it's never the county's desire to become the contractor and take those down.
I would use the roads as a good example from the development I'd offer.
Yes.
Six Road, didn't have enough.
Right, and that's a lesson learned.
Fix a road.
Yeah, right, and same as we've taken steps to improve our policies in that way, we're going to stay ahead on this one. It's a little conservative, the approach. A lot of our policy here is maybe people may see as conservative. We'll learn as we go.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Another question.
one comment. So as Mrs. McGee stated, I was thinking about, vertical infrastructure towers and communication towers require conditional use permit in the county. In the language of the zoning ordinance, the amendment to the zoning ordinance, what's permitted by right or conditional use permit, since this is somewhat of a newer territory, would it be beneficial to the county and the citizens to have a conditional use permit only for this application?
So for both the storage energy facility principle, which former solar farms, and the battery storage provision, both of those are only permitted by conditional use.
Right.
The solar panels on your house, or those
Right.
are already by right through state code. Now, the one for industrial we've proposed, that would also require county input, CUP.
Great.
The conditional use permit would last as long as the panels?
That's up to us. As part of the renewal, standardly, we have a 5-year for most standard applications come before you. We also recognize when large infrastructure or large investments occur, the timeline could be there. We can establish a timeline, negotiate with the developer at the time and say, yeah, it's a good idea, but in 20 years, we plan on doing something different for the land. They have to weigh the business decision, and that's part of our CUP evaluation.
with the spin down of one of these sites, you have, if it's a storage facility, you have a significant amount of battery equipment. And the actual photovoltaic, the solar panels, for lack of better terms.
It's I would assume for each of these, it's a lot of upfront infrastructure,
Yeah.
driving huge galvanized pipes or whatever they use into the ground. Those panels themselves are not cheap.
And the efficiency of those is changing quite a bit.
Correct.
From what they were.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I didn't want to go forward and say we're generating it's limited to this many megawatts. That could change. There could be another, there was already increase in the last couple of years. We hopefully expect more in the future for this. Batteries, I would assume too, that's a newer technology emerging. I would hazard to guess how long those are intended to last for those.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
now open it up for public comment period. You'll have 3 minutes. Are we going, Chairman, we'll keep the time. And please state your name and address when you come up to address the board.
We've also got the timers with the lights as well.
You guys are doing the same thing as the board now. Ashley's capable of doing the time right there, which allows the person who's speaking to have a sense of how much time they have left.
So they work it now?
That's what I hear.
Guess we'll find out.
I have to be the one, I'm sorry.
You're a guinea pig.
No,
Well, good evening, members of the board, and a special hello to some familiar faces and unfamiliar faces as well. My name is Jacob Carosello. I'm a director of community outreach with a nonprofit called Energy Right. And if you guys are familiar with Energy Right, we go around the state of Virginia, we educate and encourage clean energy development with conservative principles. And we believe good projects can come forward when good conservative policies are in place. My colleague Skylar Zunk has had the opportunity to speak before you previously and had the privilege of attending the community meeting in February on solar policy proposals. A special thank you to Mr. Cash for hosting an open discussion and involving Energy Right in the conversation. We appreciate the recent updates made to the solar policy. The added flexibility in the current draft is helpful to landowners, neighbors, and the county's revenue potential. Simply moving away from the shalls to shoulds allows the Planning Commission and the board more flexibility in local land use decisions. Solar is a huge benefit to so many rural localities when it is developed responsibly on the utility scale. The provisions to require vegetative buffers, reasonable setbacks, and reasonable environmental stewardship are tenets of great conservative policy. However, a few elements of the policy deserve reconsideration. At the community meeting on those policies, Eric Bronson of James River, who was mentioned earlier, shared how he created an agriculture operation of sheep grazing under the panels of these solar projects. Agriculture can and should be part of solar projects, but limiting the inclusions of good soils to 20% limits the rights and opportunities of landowners and farmers like Mr. Bronson. The 2-mile distance goal between projects should be further removed. Although not intentional, it does hurt neighbors, only really hurts neighbors that are adjacent neighbors to these solar projects. Lastly, limiting solar projects to only A1 districts unnecessarily prevents good projects from coming forward in, say, the A2 district. There certainly are decent, though smaller sites over 30 acres in the A2 district to include closed landfills and mine sites. Thank you for your attention to these matters, and thank you to the county staff for putting together these robust recommendations. With a few helpful changes, we do believe Goochland can lead and will continue to lead the state in a responsible, solid solar ordinance with a proposal you have in front of you tonight. So thank you very much, and please, I hope you consider some of these minor changes to the current draft in front of you.
Thank you.
And I forgot to say my address. I'm a lifelong Virginian, currently residing in Williamsburg, Virginia. So happy to join you all here in Goochland this evening.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Jonathan Lau, 1521 Mannequin Road. And before the timer starts, or if it hasn't already, as a point of information, Monacan Soil and Water Conservation District is currently, we we co-hold conservation easements. And a conservation easement specifies what can be done on land that's in a conservation easement. And if it's not stated that a solar collection facility could be there, it would not be permitted without violating the conservation easement. And there would be lawsuits, I would predict. So I don't know if that answers your question earlier, if that's what you're asking or not, but that's just point of information. As I said, my name is Jonathan Lyle, 1521 Mannequin Road. I'm chairman of the Monacan Soil and Water Conservation District this year, and also a Goochland Farm Bureau director. My comments are my own. They are not from the two organizations. The first question I'd like to maybe mention is that we've been hearing more and more about lithium batteries starting just spontaneously on fire. And I don't know if the fire rescue services here in the county have been contacted. We saw a presentation not long ago about blankets that can go over automobiles, but I'm not an engineer. I don't know what the possibility is or if that's been investigated. But if we're going to have something of this stature or size, and there is a possibility that a fire could happen, have we thought through what we might need to do from a response, safety response? The other is the land is still going to remain A1 zoned, but I don't believe collection facilities are a permitted land use operation. I can see that there will be some nuances that if you're grazing sheep underneath it, that truly is an agricultural use and would qualify for land use because you're doing agriculture. But if you just have solar collection facilities, panels, that's not agriculture. And so would we have a clawback on land use because they've gone out of land use? And so for 5 previous years, they now have to, I guess, even up. And again, these are details that I think can be addressed, but these are the type of things that we think through or have been thinking through as to what happens if the facility is constructed and no longer qualifies for land use. And I think county ordinance, I think, says that there would be a 5-year clawback on that. The last thing I would mention is that by limiting it to A1, we're really making a decision for that landowner as to whether or not it's economically feasible for them to put a solar collection facility in. The county says it wants to determine what its best revenue stream might be from a solar collection facility. I haven't worked the numbers. I don't know how we would tax it. I don't know what the revenue would come from a 30-acre facility or a 1,000-acre facility.
Mr. Lyle, your time is up. I
It is.
appreciate your comments.
You're very kind. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Anybody else wish to speak? Close the public comment period. Any commissioners have any comments? Am I correct that Mr. Lyle has mentioned this thing about the conservation district? In the state law, I mean, we can't prohibit. They're trying to encourage solar energy usages. We can't prohibit it unless there is a specific ordinance in a certain area, like my neighborhood. The HOA has voted to prohibit solar panels in our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the state law says that you have to allow it anyway because of encouragement of solar energy usage.
I'd have to review the exact language of that. That was one of the considerations about could HOAs prohibit or limit the use of like panels on your house. The state mandates that we have through zoning to do that. That is an issue that typically localities don't get into, whether your HOA has a say in that. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and review the exact citing the state code for that. Unless state code specifically provided that that's the opportunity, I couldn't say as a locality, unless your HOA says no. But I'd have to look back at that section of state code to see if there is any carve out. As to other conservation easements, Mr. Lyle is correct. Most of those are agreements between the easement holder, and there is often language regarding what they're allowed to do, how much land's allowed to be cleared, what are the specific uses in there. I personally haven't seen one that allows for the solar panels, but again, it's a newer thing, and some of those easements may end up allowing for it. Depends on probably the agency that's holding the easement, the conservation easement, as far as specifics, versus sort of preserved land that's in land use. You know, it's sort of a couple different topics.
I guess we'll figure it out as we go along.
Yeah, a lot of that, you know, some of the stuff like the state mandates, I'm not going to get in between them and some of those things.
Jonathan also brought up fire and rescue. Have they been discussed for this?
Right, they're aware of this policy. We talked to them early on in regards to this. They have been preparing to educate themselves on the needs for the batteries. We know that a neighboring locality has already been exploring, they're already in two neighboring localities, and their fire and rescue have learned about those. And so that's something that I know, I don't think Chief Ferguson's here tonight, but I know that he's aware of it, and we discussed it.
It's a lot of extra expense.
Then I'll really answer for him then, no.
A lot of extra expense for fire and rescue, something like
You know, I am not an expert as to what exactly entails in those. You know, it may be just additional training and, you know, some equipment. That's something we'd evaluate. That's also something we could consider during our siting agreements, is that we need, you know, we don't have the equipment in that district to fight that fire. That's a concern for us being there. What can you provide for us on site or whatever to do this? So those are things we can learn about.
expenses could be proffered in, just like in subdivision with.
Right, yeah, I think especially with these siting agreement eligibilities, that might be something we discuss with them. You know, I know people who are a little bit more expert in the audience tonight, and those are conversations I can have with them also and provide further updates to you.
He also brought up rollback responsibilities on rollback taxes. If you're already in land use, do solar panels kick you out of that land use?
In my experience, they do, and I'm not as familiar, of course, with our departments would look at that. But when you take it out of, which is basically the land use sitting there, this would be a income generating type of use. That would be part of it. It would only be the land under which the facilities are located. That's part of why I've added the specific condition in there is we need a full plat or other electronic data, like a CAD file or something that shows us this is the exact area impacted. I've been in a different situation trying to go back and calculate that. It's a pain. I want to make sure that it's up front. Everybody knows this is coming out. This is now going to be taxed differently. Doesn't mean it's precluding the agricultural uses to continue underneath of it. And in fact, that should be encouraged. How exactly that gets balanced out in the future, that's something I can't answer tonight if there is a change proposed.
Anybody else?
So just for clarification, the vehicle of the conditional use permit will allow us to make modifications to each case on a case-by-case basis, and allow it to be more of a fluid, you know, process for the county as we go.
Right, that's the encouragement of the policy. I think we can strengthen a case or make, you know, and make it better, and it makes people come to us and negotiate.
And by having the CUP, we give the surrounding neighbors and community an opportunity to weigh in on
Right.
the application.
Yeah, something like this that's newer and could take up a lot, I didn't want to spring it on people. I want to make sure it's a public process.
Right.
That's what this board policy and your input will do.
Right?
Board have any other comments? Do I hear a motion, one way or the other?
Motion to approve the countywide amended zoning ordinance.
I second it.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried.
I don't think we had it properly agenda, but if you want to forward a recommendation on the policy as well, would be just to let them, you know, if that doesn't have to be part of it, but if that would, if you want to share with the board, if you're okay with the policy as well, you know, I could let them know. Since that's part of the board's adoption.
And it may be easiest if you consider, you know, amending the prior motion that included what's before you, both the ordinance and the policy, and that way you don't have some separate vote that Ashley would have to
Who made the
figure
motion
out.
to approve?
Mr. Pawtucket.
All right, you want to add that to the?
Oh, absolutely,
As
sure.
presented.
Yeah,
And Mr. Meyer, that's appropriate. You seconded it?
Yeah.
Okay.
thank you.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 The motion
you.
to recommend approval passes on a 5-0 vote. This case will be heard before the Board of Supervisors on May 2nd, 2023, with a recommendation of approval from the Planning Commission.
Any old business, Ms. Ashley?
We have no old business. We do have several items of other business. Our first is adoption of the 2023 Planning Commission bylaws, which Ms. McGee will review the changes.
Gentlemen, you annually consider your bylaws and rules of procedure, and staff also annually considers your bylaws and rules of procedures and sees any ways in which we can make them better, more appropriate, or more responsive to things that you have encountered in the prior year. And in fact, when you look at the changes to 2.63 and 2.64 in terms of how a vote is occurring when a vote to approve fails, and that is responsive to what happened, I guess, in the Truitt case earlier this year. It was clear what the Planning Commission wanted, but it was very difficult on staff, both Callie in my office and Ashley, to figure out how to word all that when it was an approval motion that failed. So we think it's an improvement to your bylaws to simply say here, when that occurs, it is in fact deemed equivalent to adopting a resolution to deny, which procedurally is accurate, but it just was never stated, and so this clarification would make that easier. In addition, there have been times when you all have a tie vote, and it typically automatically then gets moved on to your next meeting if there's still time to do it. But there are times when, not understanding that a tie would occur, it would be the wish that there be another motion be passed. So that something, for instance, doesn't wait another month at the commission. And so the changes to 2.64 about a tie vote, which allows you to say, if there's been a tie vote and someone wants to make another motion, that could occur. But then if it doesn't occur, it will be deferred to the next meeting. And that just allows that situation when you might have an applicant very tight on time, and a tie vote in that 30 days is really just going to be a killer for the project. If someone then wants to make a different motion, which might pass, at least it gets the chance to move on to the board. So that just becomes another alternative. We think it would help you operate in the environments in which you find yourself. Also allows for a second tie vote to just go ahead and have that be reported to the board. I also want to tell you that this doesn't change this commission's opportunity if there's been a tie vote and you do want to pass it to the board. If you remember, you have in the past waived your bylaws and asked to have a tie vote reported to the board the first time, and that would be appropriate. That's not being taken away by this change. But again, we think that would help improve, put in front of everybody what the process is. Then in the time limit, section 2-7, the language, this is just meant to clarify what we think has always been the case in terms of how much time the commission has to act on something. We're blessed that you all are not deferrers, and that typically you take things right up and handle them and move them on. But as we looked at the solar policy, which did take additional time, and your deferral of that allowed for a great more community input and staff time, but it wasn't clear from your bylaws that a ordinance amendment was subject to that same 70 days. Staff did think that it was and should be, and so this is just clarifying what we believed to be the case, so that next time we won't spend 2 days researching it and talking about it. We just look down and go, yep, that's what we do. And then finally, it's actually in the county ordinance and in state law, the change to 5.5 about attendance. And this was just an idea to be more transparent, that when people look to what happens in the Planning Commission, we tend to look here. And so to go ahead and include that attendance expectation here was just, again, trying to put all the pertinent information in one place so that we could rely on this document without having to go look at the county ordinance that says that same thing, or the state law that says that same thing, but you could look here. So these are generally to clean up your procedure, to do things in keeping with what we have been doing, and to just do some clarifications.
We thank you for that. Do I have a motion that we approve the adoption?
I move that we approve.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
the meeting calendar.
We'll need a motion and a vote to approve the adoption of the 2023-2024 Planning Commission regular meeting calendar. Should be the last page of the packet.
Gotta find it. I had it.
Right as I got that.
I think the only meeting that we generally have capital is the July meeting. And as far as I'm concerned, the calendar looks okay. Unless anybody has an objection to any of the other dates on there.
Good.
Okay. Somebody move to adopt that?
Move to adopt.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Village plans update.
Yes, sir.
You have 3 minutes.
Absolutely, I'll keep this very quick. I'm Jamie Sherry, Director of Community Development. This is going to sound very familiar to you since I just repeated most of this, stated this most to you at our pre-meeting. But for those who are watching at home and for the folks in the audience, I just wanted to give a quick update on the small area plans for both the Courthouse Village and the Centerville Village. We have been making great progress in moving forward with the draft. We've been working with Timmons Group on a regular basis. Upcoming events, this upcoming Tuesday, there will be a work session for the Planning Commission that will be held here in room 270. Representatives from the consultant group will be there. They'll be asking some questions, generating some answers to help them move forward with the planning process. Soon after that, the draft plans are expected to go public sometime in early to mid-May, followed by 2 community meeting updates. So that's when there'll be an opportunity for the consultant to come out and bring the community up to speed as to what the draft entails prior to the public hearings. As it is right now, we expect to have the Planning Commission public hearing in May, followed by public hearings in June for the Board of Supervisors. Each village will get their own separate public hearing. So there'll be 2 meeting dates in May and then also in June for the public hearings. Okay?
Thank you. We have some cases, and they're going to be coming up between now and we actually adopt the village plans. Do you anticipate any conflicts between what we adopt and what the plan's going to be, based on what you know right now?
Based on what I know right now, no. I don't think there's anything that is in the queue to move forward between now and the potential adoption dates for any of the properties within each of those villages.
Okay.
Of course.
I make a motion to approve the update. That's a great update.
Any other commissioner members have any items? No. I hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Adjourn.
Thank you, sir.
Who gets the? Jamie, I'll go over and get the.